Welcome everyone to our midweek worship service. We are so glad to see everyone out tonight. Just wanted to make a couple of updates. First, we don't have an update. I know we all received an email from Mike Travellini. We don't have an update, unfortunately, on how ICO is doing. There were some very big end-of-care decisions and things to be made, as the email indicated. So we need to really be continuing in prayer for this family and the decisions that are being made, and of course, comfort, all of those things. So they're in much need of our prayer right now. I've received an update that Jim Forrester's heart cath went well, that he's recovering. There may be some follow-up procedures with that. I did hear today that Janine Burton was able to go home Saturday from the hospital. And so she's slowly recovering, Robert said, at home Windsor. Let's see. Okay. Events coming up. So we have this Saturday, the teen get-together at Easton Sports Complex, or laser tag. Is that waiver still open, and want people to keep signing up? So that sounds like a really fun event where, maybe us older people get involved and tear calves or sprain ankles, kind of things like that. So, all right, so we have upcoming January 17th, the ladies get together. They're painting. I don't know if they're twisting on that. So that's January 17th on a Friday. The joke didn't go over well, I'm sorry. This may be my last time doing announcements. It's the 27th. It's the 27th. It is not the 17th. The 27th, so sorry about that. At 6:30. Thank you, Ryan. All right. Men's Leadership Communication Weekend with Phil Arnold. The Better Arnold will be here on February 3rd through the 5th. That's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Begins on Friday. And there's a sign-up sheet, Lindsay told me, in the back. They would really like to get a head count on who's going to be able to attend that. All right. Teen Weekend is coming up, the February 18th at Mark and Laura's. Super excited about that. It's going to be on life lessons is going to be the theme from Ephesians chapter 6. And there is registration available on the website. And it actually says if you register by February 1st, you can ensure that you'll get a t-shirt. Otherwise, you're going to have to show up without a shirt. Or is that wrong? That's right? Okay, Mark said that's right. So we want to get our kids registered for that. So if you could log in, get our head count for our people, and then certainly spread the word about that great event. It's one of our favorite events of the year. So fortunately for you all, that's all the announcements I have at this time. So we'll continue in our worship service.
Psalm 19. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine have promised. O Father, draw me close to you. Calm now my spirit, peace renew. And yes, I know you hear, for you are near, for you have promised, and I believe. Then I will praise your name forever. I'll give you thanks and magnify your loving favor. And I will tell of your salvation, for all your promises are true, and I believe. I lift my hand to reach your face, finding your arms a hiding place, to be enfolded there within your care, for you have promised, and I believe. Then I will praise your name forever. I'll give you thanks and magnify your loving favor. And I will tell of your salvation, for all your promises are true, and I believe. Secure my heart, Lord, as I kneel. Make sure my trust, my all I yield. Then I'll be one with you in all I do, for you have promised, and I believe. Then I will praise your name forever. I'll give you thanks and magnify your loving favor. And I will tell of your salvation, for all your promises are true, and I believe.
Tonight I'll be reading from 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 13. Now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you. For you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying there is a peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief, for you are all children of the light, children of the day. We are not the children of the night or of the darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For these who sleep at night and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we might live with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing. We ask you, brothers, to respect those who labor among you and are over in the Lord and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love because of their work. Be at peace among yourselves. Please be seated.
Good evening, everyone. I have one question. What is your why? There is this person on YouTube I enjoy watching. His name is Simon Sinek, and he's released books, put out content, done TED Talks, but he's kind of like the why guy because he's always asking why. Why is Apple consistently outcompeting their competitors? Why was Martin Luther King Jr. the person that was chosen to speak during the civil rights movement when there was definitely other people at that time that could have also been speakers? Why was it that the Wright brothers were the people who were able to first do manned flight when there were other people who were more well-equipped, had more resources, and yet these were the people who were able to accomplish these things? So why? Well, what Simon Sinek explains to his audience is that it's all about purpose. He has this diagram that he likes to show. It's called the golden circle. And you can think of it like a bullseye with 3 different levels. You've got your outer, your middle, and then your very center bullseye. Now, the outer section would be your what. This is your goals, what you're trying to accomplish. The next section is your how. What are you going to do in order to reach those goals that you're trying to achieve? And then at the very middle is your why. And these are your key motivators, the things that lead you to actually carry out the how and get to the what. Now, oftentimes, what we end up doing is focusing so much on the what that we really forget about our why. And when it comes down to the why, it's all about being able to define that for yourself. And so when we look at this golden circle, think of it in terms of New Year's resolutions. We're often looking at, I'm going to drop X amount of weight, I'm going to be financially free and I'm going to get out of debt, or I'm going to read more, pray more, whatever it is. We have these results that we're really wanting to get to, but we've talked about it before, and a lot of people, we get gym memberships skyrocketing early in the season and then falls off as the year continues. Sometimes we'll be on a Bible plan and we're doing really good for like a month or two, and then you forget and it just kind of spirals. When we consider what our why is, that's the added motivation in order to be able to continue carrying these things out. To give an easy example, okay, I'm gonna try and floss every day of the year. Okay, why are you gonna do that? Well, I want to have good gum health. I don't want cavities, save on dental costs, and I want a good smile. Very simple, but sometimes we kind of internally know these things, but we don't really say it. I want to read my Bible every day. Okay, well, why do you want to read your Bible every day? Firstly, because God tells us to. That's kind of important. But also because we are called to be equipped to share the word of God with other people. And so we need to know it, and we need to be able to explain it to others. Proverbs 21:2 says, "Every man is right in their own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart." And when we're considering our why, we need to make sure that it is also aligned with God's motives, that our motives are aligned with what God's will is for us. And so I wanted to just offer this as an encouragement that you consider and you think about, what is it that actually motivates you? It could be in your life as a whole. It could be for maybe something you're trying to accomplish in the season of life. But why are you doing it, and what is leading you to do that? And there's this kind of exercise. It's almost like a way of questioning. It's kind of like getting to the root of the problem. It's called the 5 whys. So you say a statement like, I'm having trouble being able to keep this habit. I'm having trouble breaking this bad habit. Okay, why am I having so much trouble with that? And then you answer the question. You say, okay, I'm having trouble with it because of this. Well, why? And you see, as you continue to ask why, you get further and further down to the root of the actual problem. And You do that 5 times, and I mean, you might feel like a toddler, always asking like, why? But it's very useful. I've done it a couple times myself, and it's kind of a cool little way to, think about it. But I just encourage you guys, as you're going about your life, consider what are your motivations, what's your purpose, and with that, I'll close this out in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this night that you've blessed us with. Father, I pray that as we continue about our lives, you would be our why, that you would lead us to carry out your will as you see fit for each and every one of us. I pray, Father, that as we continue about our week, we'd be able to consider these things and be able to show your love to others. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen. You may be dismissed for classes.
Okay, it's time to begin our class tonight, our adult class on the Psalms. I'm super not excited to be up here tonight in front of all you Bible scholars, but I have thoroughly enjoyed getting into the Psalms. Bruce has tried to impress on us the point that the Psalms were so very important to the first century Christians, and there's so much there. There's so much there that I have been missing for a long time, and so ashamedly admit that. But it's been a fantastic time getting into Psalms. I've really enjoyed the other classes as well. I've been asked to lead, and I want to call it lead a discussion because I would like some input tonight as well. But lead a discussion on the Messianic Psalms. Well, that's interesting because as Bruce noted in one of his first 2 classes, the entire book of Psalms is Messianic. It points to deliverance. to salvation, through the lament, through the confessions, through the imprecatory. I got the word right. All of those areas point to deliverance, salvation. They point to the Messiah who perfected our salvation, who gave himself ultimately for us. And so when you think about the Psalms, you think about the messianic portions of the Psalms, well, there's a lot. There's a lot. There's 15 or so chapters that are referenced in the New Testament. There's over 25 references to Jesus or the Messiah or events in his life in the New Testament that are referenced. And so there's a ton of chapters to choose from. And I have ADD. So it was difficult for me to really narrow down, but I'll tell you what caught my eye as I was reading through them. And that's Psalms 22. Psalm 22 is known as the Psalm of the Cross. And it gives us perhaps the most complete picture of the crucifixion of Jesus. But what's really interesting is that it gives it to us through the prophecy of David. And what's even more interesting about that is that it's from the sufferer's perspective. So when we have Jesus crucified, put in the tomb, he's resurrected, he's back, he shows his scars, he shows the battle wounds, but we really don't get the sufferer's perspective. We have the eyewitness accounts, of course, but what did it mean to him? What was it like for him? Family, Psalms 22 tells it. It tells it in detail. And so we're going to spend certainly the majority of our time tonight on that particular chapter, but I invite you to really get into the book of Psalms and read for yourself, because it's just full of deliverance, it's full of salvation. And we're in a great position, to be quite honest, because when the first century church was considering Jesus, considering who he was, considering what they knew, considering the law, considering the Psalms, they didn't realize it was being fulfilled in front of them. But we do. We have the fulfillment. So we're looking at this from a very blessed perspective, to be the saved of God. So let's begin let's read Psalms 22 together, and then we'll begin to kind of dissect this chapter. Psalms chapter 22 and verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear, and in the night season I am not silent. But you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you, they trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not ashamed. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, he trusted in the Lord, let him trust him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. But you are one who took me out of the womb. You made me trust while on my mother's breasts. I was cast upon you from birth. From my mother's womb you have been God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths like a raging and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all of my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all of my bones. They look and stare at me and divide my garments among them. And for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far from me. O my strength, hasten to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth and from the horns of the wild oxen. You have answered me, the New King James Version says there after verse 21. Let's stop there. What are your impressions of what I just read? What are some of your first impressions right off the cuff? What did you hear? Exactly what happened. Exactly what happened physically to him. So let's talk about what this is probably not, what this is likely not. It's not describing an illness. Certainly when you read the descriptive language there, this is an acute event. This is something that happened relatively quickly, but not a long illness. So it's certainly not an illness. It's likely not an event from David's life. No event that we have recorded includes crucifixion from David's life, and of course that wasn't really the main mode of execution during David's time as well. I think the Romans are actually credited with the most current form of crucifixion. So we don't have any such event in David's life that includes such humiliation and torture, especially for a king. Of course, David references times in his life where he did feel very downtrodden, very oppressed. But King David, as we're told, never experiences such humiliation and torture as this. So that's what it's not. Let's talk about what this is. It's an execution. It's describing an execution. Crucifixion was likely, again, not the form of execution during David. And what this is a complete foreshadowing, as Mark just told us, of the crucifixion and sufferings of Jesus. These events happened. They're prophesied about, and then they come to fruition. They happen. It's a complete foreshadowing there. And of course, we know from Acts 2:30, where Peter tells us that David is a prophet. Acts chapter 2 and verse 30. Therefore, being a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn an oath to him that the fruit of his body, according to the flesh, he would raise up the Christ to sit on his throne. Therefore, being a prophet is speaking about David in verse 29. So this is a prophecy. This happened. And what's really interesting in Psalms 22 is you do see an intermingling of the sufferings of David and the experiences of David, and then the experiences of Christ. And they're all kind of intermingled together as we read through this chapter. So some of my sort of initial thoughts: what about the sufferer's humility? Amid such treatment, such humility, such humble words that are used. And this is clearly different than the tone David typically takes when he calls for vengeance. There's no plea for vengeance in this chapter at all. There's no call to arms. There's no call for God to smite them. There's no call for vengeance on the behalf of the sufferer. Joseph Geleno is a Catholic priest. Some of you may have heard of the Geleno Psalmody. And this is a person who, several years ago, I don't really remember how long ago, took the Psalms and put them to music. And so these are typically like Gregorian chants. But every chapter has its own song, its own title, and its own music to it. Well, for Psalms 22, Joseph titled it, "The Suffering Servant Wins the Deliverance of the Nation." The suffering servant wins the deliverance of the nations. And we see, as we continue to read through Psalms chapter 22, we will see the deliverance described. And if I have time tonight, I'd like to read several chapters that talk about the deliverance that we receive of all nations. And then, of course, like I mentioned before, this is a unique perspective that we read about in Psalms chapter 22. This is, again, the perspective of the sufferer, the person who is being humiliated, who is being mistreated. We're finally getting to read what that felt like from their perspective. So let's go ahead and get into chapter 22. And Hey, Kyle, can we turn the mic down just a little bit? Either I'm breathing super heavy or I'm... Thank you. All right, chapter 22 and verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? Oh, my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear. And in the night season, I am not silent. What are we thinking there? Why the words my God used there? Why is that important? The words my God are used there. What are your thoughts on that? Shows a relationship, right? My God. My God. There's a relationship there. It's not a casual relationship. But to cry out, my God, do we feel that we can cry out, my God, to our deliverer, to our strength, to the one who deemed our salvation worthy from the beginning of time? I think some of my other initial thoughts of these two verses is, this is obviously and feels like to me a feeling that the sufferer has never felt before. This is all new. This is an all new feeling. Never experienced before. Crying out, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? Why do you not hear the words of my groaning? I'm crying in the daytime, you don't hear. In the night season, I'm not silent. That's coming from a perspective of unfamiliarity. It's coming from a perspective, again, of a feeling that's not been experienced by the sufferer before. It's complete vulnerability. And as we get further in the chapter, we'll see that vulnerability again described. Kidner, in his commentary, described these two verses and the feeling felt by the sufferer here as the familiar, protective presence of God is withdrawn. The sufferer no longer feels the protective presence of his God, of his salvation. Is this a lapse in faith? When you read that, do you feel like this is a lapse in faith? Does anybody feel that way? Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a new and horrible feeling, not a lapse in faith at all. When I read the verses, I cry in the daytime, you do not hear, and in the night season, I'm not silent, I'm taken to Gethsemane. In the night season, I am not silent. Gethsemane, when Jesus is praying, can this cup pass from me, but your will be done. And we don't know, it's not recorded, but Jesus carried the shadow of the cross over him his entire life. From as early as he could remember, he knew his purpose on earth. And the shadow of the cross is constantly over him. So when it says he cries in the daytime, were there other moments in Jesus' life where he said, is there a different plan? Can this cup pass from me? It certainly wasn't in Gethsemane when Jesus first realized what was fixing to happen. He knew very well what was going to happen, and David, the prophet, knew what was going to happen. I often think about that, how often Jesus thought about it. I mean, when we, not that it's even close to the same, but from only thing we can kind of relate it to is maybe there's some upcoming surgery that we're super nervous about, that may be so dangerous that we don't know if we're going to make it, or whatever it may be, a horrible illness. He carried that his entire life, knowing his purpose, knowing what he was going to do, knowing what he was going to go through. And I think that perspective is just, it's so amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Let's skip down to verse 3. But you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They cried to you and were delivered. Verse 5. So notice the transition here. So we go from, I'm crying out to you, you're not hearing, to, but you, but thou. Some of the translations say, but thou are holy, but you are holy. There's a transition there that's super important. The sufferer's attempting to pull himself up. He's feeling the oppression. He's feeling the nervousness. He's feeling everything piling on him. The protective presence is gone, but you are holy. This calls to mind trying to pull yourself up. Another psalm that we have a song about, Psalm 61 and verse 2. From the end of the earth I will cry to you. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. The sufferer Jesus is trying to pull himself up at this point, pull himself up out of the depths of despair by leaning on what he knows and trusts. There's a lot of unknown, there's a lot of uncertainty as we read the first two verses. We're completely and very upfront introduced to the uncertainty that the sufferer is going through. But whatever was unknown, what did he know? You are holy. You are enthroned. Our fathers trusted in you. They cried and they were delivered. He knows God is holy. Do we lean on the rock that is higher than I, that is higher than we are, when we are in despair? He references our fathers in this, and I often think back to, who is he talking about there? Our fathers trusted in you. From David's perspective, our fathers trusted in you and you delivered them. Who are some of the fathers in the early that would have been delivered through God that David would be talking about here? Moses, Joseph. Those are the three right off the top. Those are the three that I picked as well, Jan. Absolutely. The 5 kings, prison, Egypt. Our fathers trusted in you. There's a history here that I'm basing this on. I'm not basing my feelings. I'm not basing my trust on a whim. There's a track record of trust here. There's a track record of deliverance here. I'm leaning on that deliverance right now. Save me. I trust you. Save me. All right, verse 6. We'll go through verse 8 here. I am a worm. I am no man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip. They shake their heads, saying, He trusted in the Lord. Let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. We're leaning on God. We're being mocked for leaning on God. There's New Testament references here. Matthew chapter 27, Luke chapter 23. We have the crowd shaking their head, ridiculing Jesus. We have that coming to fulfillment in those two Gospels. It's also a reference, I believe, and Bruce hit on Psalms chapter 2, which is a huge introduction to the triumph of Jesus and his kingdom. And it says there that the rulers plot and take counsel against the Lord, his anointed. It says, but God laughs because he's put his anointed on the throne. But that is also probably a reference as well as there. Why worm here? So I'm a worm and not a man. Why worm here? What do we think about when we think about a worm? I mean, you don't think much. Like you don't think much. A worm, it's like you see one on the ground, you don't really notice it. We fish with them. It's probably their most use, right? Nobody eats them. You know, it's the lowest of the low. I am a worm and not a man. They are disgusting. So exactly. But it's an awful way to describe yourself. It's the lowest way, one of the lowest ways to describe yourself. And that's how we have the sufferer here describing himself. The scorn hurts. Why does it hurt so much? Hmm? Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Hmm? Yep. going to get to that. Did you read my lesson? You did. You read the psalm. That's awesome. No, that's a great point. That's absolutely right. We're gonna talk about that too. It's a huge moment. It's a huge moment there. But the scorn hurts. Okay, hurts David as he's writing it. It hurts Jesus as it's happening to him, because when you think about words to describe David and his life, you think about words like affection, relationships, counsel. Those were words you might use to describe David. Those are words God might use to describe David and the events in his life to some degree. But affection, relationships, counsel are perfected in Jesus, who is the sufferer here. Those are perfected in Jesus. In the greater Son, as the Psalms calls him. David is the son. Jesus is the greater son of David. These things are perfected in him. David will also, a difference here, David would also pity himself often in his Psalms. Right, LJ? There's a fair amount of pity there in a lot of the Psalms. And lament in his confessions. Jesus, we have an example in Luke chapter 23 of Jesus diverting the pity. In the middle of all of these horrible things happening to him, daughters of Jerusalem, weep for yourselves. Dry. Exactly. Exactly. He's diverting pity. Even in the depths of despair, he's still diverting pity. That's completely different than what we find in David. This is not talking about David. This is talking about Jesus, certainly. To Jan's point, we often treat God as a God of convenience. That we don't cultivate a relationship. We don't put time into it to grow a relationship with God. But when something happens, when we need him, we're calling out. We're calling out of convenience for immediate relief. Jesus was tempted through his life. He's hungry. Turn the stones to bread. Show your power. Throw yourself down from here. You're God. You've called yourself the I am. Come down from the cross. Why are you up there? You're so great. You're so mighty. Come down. But like Jan said, he didn't. He stayed and absorbed the ridicule. Jesus shows us through this perfection, through his sacrifice over himself, over his body. He shows us the true God of purpose, love, and grace. Verse 9, but you are he who took me out of the womb, made me trust on my mother's breast. I was cast upon you from birth, from my mother's womb. You have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is no one to help. It's common phrasing here in the subset of verses that we just read. Over in, can anybody think of where they are in the Psalms? Common phrasing there about God knowing us. I hear it. Is 137, 139 definitely has it. Let's read that. Psalms 139. You have searched me and know me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You are acquainted with all of my ways. There is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You skip down to verse 15. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed. And in your book they were all written, the days fashioned for me, as yet there were none of them. This is common phrasing that David uses to describe his relationship with God, his knowledge of God. And of course, again, this relationship was perfected with Jesus and God. In the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God. And so this is certainly talking about Jesus here. This is a relationship. This is no common acquaintance or casual relationship, one person put it. This is a deep deep relationship that we're referring to here from the beginning. And if you think about it, for as long as David could remember, he had confidence and trust in God. That was proven in the events in his life, where he stepped up, became a leader because of his trust in God, because he knew God and had confidence in him. And for David and the greater son Jesus, life ultimately began with the mother. And I think often about the actual crucifixion, and this is depicted in a movie. I don't remember what movie it was about the crucifixion, but thinking about the mother, earthly mother of Jesus, you're thinking about Mary when she's seeing Jesus, and in this movie it kind of depicts her witnessing his horrible treatment and thinking back to when he was a kid. And it seemed like he had no cares. And he was, sprouting up and growing. For David and Jesus, life began with the mother. And I think that's a point there that I really drew out of those subset of verses, along with the fact that this is a deep, deep relationship that's formed from the beginning. The next sort of verses that we're going to get into, we're going to transition here to verse 12. And we're going to skip around a little bit because what I want to do is sort of show two separate things in the last bit of time I have. What I want to try to do is show not only what's happening to the crowd, but what's happening physically to Jesus. So I want to talk about the outward, but also want to talk about the inward. So I'm going to separate some of these verses out. So we're going to start with verses 12 and 13. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths like a raging and roaring lion. And over to 16. For dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They look and they stare at me. They divide my garments among them. For my clothing they cast lots. Cast lots is certainly fulfilled in all four of the Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we find this verse fulfilled, this prophecy fulfilled during the crucifixion of them dividing Jesus' garments and casting lots for them. What do the words describe here? They gape at me with their mouths. They're like a roaring lion. The dogs have surrounded me. They stare at me. They look at me. They've surrounded me. They've encircled me. What's the demeanor of the crowd it's describing in this prophecy? Mob, frenzy, angry, attack mode. I mean, they are absolutely, this is an absolute prophecy to what Jesus is seeing right now. They're encircling him. What moment was this? Was this the moment that they're encircling when Pilate presents Jesus? Was this the moment at the cross where they're circling? We don't know, but there were several moments during this time in Jesus' suffering where he was encircled, where they closed in around him. They thought Jesus was a false prophet. They thought Jesus could not be the king. They were whipped into a frenzy by the leadership, who we'll get into, maybe talk about, were nervous, were scared that Jesus was there to take away their power, their standing. They were no longer going to be able to oppress. But why use the word bulls to describe the crowd? What's that? Yes. Absolutely. Powerful animals. Are they stubborn? I have uncontrollable, yeah. Exactly right. Uncontrollable, rage. They destroy. They're stubborn, right? Stubborn, strong. They go into rage. Dogs run in packs, absolutely. Attack in packs. That's absolutely right. It says bulls of Bashan here. So that would have been certainly something that David was familiar with. The bulls of Bashan. So the bulls referenced there were known to be big, well-fed, highly sought-after bulls of unmatched beauty. So everybody wanted a bull or a cow of Bashan. So So it was a highly sought after. They're from the land of the giants, it's described. Highly sought after. We hear about the cows of Bashan in the book of Amos, chapter 4. And it's the cows of Bashan are being used to describe some very stubborn people. Amos chapter 4 and verse 1, hear this word, you cows of Bashan. You are on the mountains of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy. Who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who are unmatched in their beauty, who are unrivaled in their stubbornness. Who might that be describing that's encircling Jesus at this moment? Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 23. Beginning in verse 4. The woe moments. Jesus is getting on to the scribes and the Pharisees, putting them in their place. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay all the men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. And then down to verse 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and cumin, and you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. Justice and mercy, those you ought to have done while leaving the others undone. You have neglected justice and mercy. What did Amos say? You oppress the poor, you crush the needy. They wear tassels so everyone can see them. They want their beauty to be noticed and their prayers noticed by everyone. I think it's describing the rulers. I think the bulls of Bashan here may be describing the rulers in their stubbornness, in the way they wanted everyone to look at them, in the way they gathered as a pack, they attacked. They came up with a plan to get rid of Jesus. They're unmatched, again, in their stubbornness. They battled with Jesus his entire ministry. They had put themselves in position of power during the time where there was no prophets. The bulls of Bashan have encircled me, gape at me with their mouths. They've surrounded me. For my clothing, they cast lots. It's dire, dire times here. Verse 14 goes into the physical suffering of Jesus. I'm not a medical expert, but I've heard it preached that what we're going to read here is exactly likely what physiologically and what physically happened to Jesus' body. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death. They pierced my hands and my feet. From the outward to the inward. From what he sees to what he feels. These are very descriptive words. I had no idea I had too much material. I'm sorry. Verses 19 through 21 very quickly. O Lord, be not far from me. O my strength, hasten to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth and from the horns of the wild oxen. Verse 21, and then at the end of verse 21 in the New King James Version, you probably can't see it from where you are. There's a gap in the middle of verse 21. After save me, after the horn, save me from the horns of the wild oxen, that says, you have answered me. You have delivered me, some translations say. From this horrible apex, this final moment of despair, everyone's encircled me, they're all around me. Save me. You have answered me. And that answer, if you want to stay in the Psalms, that answer is described perfectly in Psalm 72, in Psalms 110, the second half of Psalms 118. The King lives, he reigns forever. And how blessed a position we are to see the fulfillment. Thank you for your attention.